Hi, welcome to Music to Our Ears. My name's Emergen.
And my name's Evangeline.
And today we have a very special episode for you guys. Not only are we standing, first and foremost, but today we want to talk about rock and roll. Now, normally when we do genre discussions, we kind of set it up where we're already talking about the genre as it is. But what we never really get a chance to do is kind of talk about the beginnings of a genre, like what comes together to make a genre, make it a whole, right? And I think rock and roll especially is a great opportunity to do that because of the diverse things that feed into it that kind of made it what it was. So we have a few sets for you guys today. The first thing I want to show you guys is a bit of a timeline so we can take you guys through the whole process. And if you come over with us this way, we'll show you what we've got. So come on over.
So we've got pre-1900s, and we're going to start off with the transatlantic slave trade in New Orleans. So New Orleans was like the hot spot of the slave trade, and because of that, we see a lot of diverse cultures coming from everywhere throughout the earth. And so New Orleans. Within New Orleans, there's something called Congo Square. Congo Square is where slaves would gather to practice their drums, their ethnic culture, things like that, keep it alive. And every Sunday they would go to Congo Square and they would hold basically like what we today would call block parties. They would do the same thing. They'd have markets, they'd have music, they'd have dancing, they'd have all of that just to keep their culture alive. So within that, we see rhythm and sounds of the homelands. And so we start seeing work songs being created by these slaves to motivate each other and in a way to protest the system that they were just forced into. And these work songs were then translated to gospel songs, and then blues is what we see. So we're going to move over to the 1900s, 1910s. So 1910s, we see all these instruments coming from Europe and everywhere else because, yes, New Orleans is a port city, so people are constantly coming in and out of different cultures, backgrounds, everything. So we start seeing what we call ragtime. Ragtime is taking these blues and this gospel music and enhancing it essentially and creating this really new sound. And Buddy Bolden is the father of ragtime. And Buddy Bolden was able to master this new genre. But then Jelly Roll Morton would argue that, saying that he is the father of it. It's just this back and forth. But Jelly Morton was able to take ragtime as a pianist and play it in brothels. And that's where we start seeing this translate into what we call Harlem style. So then we're going to move over to Louis Armstrong. And Louis Armstrong took Harlem and then he created jazz with the gospel influences, with the blues influences, ragtime, all that. He created jazz. And then we see Mamie Smith in the 20s, who was the first African-American woman to record a blues soundtrack or blues song. And this was crazy. And within the 1920s, we see the Great Migration. The Great Migration was basically all these African-Americans leaving these southern states and going to the northern part of the U.S. And then we start seeing different versions of jazz, just regional differences. And yeah, I think now we're going to go into the 1930s. So Emergen, take it away.
Yeah, so as this rapid process of urbanification occurs, what you start seeing is the same thing kind of you're seeing in places like Congo Square. African Americans need places to express themselves, like everyone does. So they find places like local markets, street corners, places where they can play their music. And in doing so, start forming a number of local cultures that start forming together into what would really become, the hardline blues sound. One of the focuses here really is Chicago. And the reason why I want to focus on Chicago is because Chicago is where the transition is made from acoustic to electric. So you have people like Sister Rosetta Tharpe, who are virtuosos on the guitar. She is insanely good. There are so many people who take inspiration from her. So many people who, look back and say, she's the person that they learned how to play or how to play in a certain style from. You have guys like Howlin' Wolf. You have guys like Tampa Red and Georgia Tom. Memphis Mini. All these people, because there is an interest in kind of putting this all together, what happens is they start getting picked up by record labels. This isn't big enough to turn into a national scene, but it is definitely big enough to sort of turn a profit locally. So you have guys like Lester Melrose here in Bluebird Record. Bluebird was a subsidiary of RCA, who basically go in and say, hey, pay me some money and I'll record this for you. Now, what he doesn't say is he also says, he's going to take basically all the rights for the songs. So if any of them ever get popular, they're not going to see a dime of it, which is what happens to certain artists like Arthur Crudup, who basically gets bitten out of all of his contracts. And it's so bad that basically in the 70s, despite making a number of R&B and blues standards, essentially, dies essentially penniless, which is, quite a shame. But of course, in the 40s, another thing is happening as well, the Second World War, which kind of puts a halt on the development of all of this for a considerable amount of time. But when we come back, there's another massive movement, once again, into these urban areas, a demand for more music. And not only that, but the creation of a brand new class that comes around, that being teenagers, kids who have disposable incomes, who have allowances, whose parents are able to fully cover them. And because of that, there's a ton of money being sloshed around trying to get a hold of this new, classes, all the money they have. And what basically happens is all these record companies get together and they're like, okay, how do we do this? And what they come up with is we're going to take this blues sound and we're just going to try to transition it to a larger white audience. So the main idea they come up with in order to do this is basically give these blues samples and these blues standards to white artists and have them record it. You have guys like Pat Boone who become famous off this sort of stuff. But at the same time, teenagers kind of see through it. They see the development of what's going on and they want to listen to the original artists. So despite what's going on, you still have guys like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, B.B. King, who are just getting tremendously popular and are able to sort of break through the market. And of course, this all comes together in one final figure, that being Elvis Presley, or the king of rock and roll. And Elvis's story is a bit interesting. He grows up as the son of sharecroppers. His family is very poor. He grows up in a very poor neighborhood in Toledo. Forgot the town. But basically, grows up extremely poor and is surrounded by all this black cultural influence. He goes to black churches, he listens to black music, he credits people like Arthur Crudup for developing his sound, and eventually his family moves to Memphis, and while there he steps into Sun Records, who is owned by Sam Phillips. Sam Phillips is very obsessed with kind of finding this new sound, and basically what happens is he records 2 songs, one of them being an R&B standard and the other being a country standard, and people fall in love with it. It gets played everywhere. Guys like Sam Phillips, Alan Freed make an absolute killing moving this record around. And from there, everything just kind of takes off. R&B and blues turn into rock and roll. It develops this brand new sound. There are a ton of new artists coming out of it. And together, it kind of forms the core of rock and roll that would exist really from about 1954 to 1958. After that, it would kind of fall off. But, this is how we got here. This is the development of the whole process at work. And with that, I think we're going to take a short break because I think there are some questions to be had, or at least Evangeline, you have some questions about whether or not Mr. Presley deserves the title as the king of rock and roll. So we'll come back to that, and when we do, we'll have that discussion. So stick around.
Are you the person your grandparents call when their TV stops working?
No. Okay, so you want to hit the large red button. No, Nemo, that's the blue button. I can tell you're pressing the blue button.
Have you ever turned something off and then back on and it magically worked?
Do you ever look at someone using technology wrong and in your head you think, man, this person is not doing this right, but you kind of decide not to say anything because that could be rude, but it also would save that person so much time?
Have you ever dreamt of untangling cables?
Do batteries look like a tasty snack to you, and you tried to eat them once, but then you got sick, but after you recovered you did it again because deep down you knew that the batteries would give you so much energy. Do you feel a deep sense of purpose when you push a button?
If any of this applies to you, you may be entitled to financial compensation. As a student engineer at KBVR TV.
No experience required. An endless fountain of audiovisual knowledge awaits.
We're back with podiums this time. So, Elvis Presley is commonly referred to as the king of rock and roll.
Yeah.
And there are people who, especially more recently, have kind of started to find issue with that title.
After all the movies, yeah.
After all the movies, after all the press that's, well, not press that's come out, but
like,
there's been a recent re-examination of
yeah.
this. And his sort of legacy and how he impacts all of this.
Yeah.
Kind of, what do you think about that?
I think that's really important that we're talking about this and bringing awareness to artists that inspired Elvis Presley, and that Elvis Presley did steal some from some of these artists, and I'm glad that we're recognizing this because Elvis Presley is a very talented individual. Very. There is no denying his talent, and we have to be grateful for him blending the white culture and black culture together in music, because that would have never happened without him.
Right.
But we need to recognize, and we have with these movies and with more articles and stories coming out about people that he's stolen music from. Because it's weird, because I think what I've seen from the trend and just doing research is earlier in his career, he didn't really pay attention to doing royalties for anybody or that kind of thing. But also, like you were saying, contracts for African American artists was just it didn't exist.
Yeah, mostly because, like I said, it was explicitly people in these studios taking advantage of people who had no idea how contract law works.
Exactly. So, with that said, royalties wasn't even a thing for black individuals at the time.
Right.
Later in his career, we see him actually talking about having so much influence from Fats Domino, and if anything, Fats Domino and Elvis were really good friends, especially when Elvis had gone to Las Vegas and was really anxious about it because that was such a huge scale for Elvis when he first started, and Fats Domino was there with him. And if anything, Elvis believes, and he said this in articles with Fats Domino present, that he does not himself believe that he is the king of rock. He thinks that Fats Domino is the king of rock. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, sort of because on one hand there are very real stories about Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, because of how big he is, because
There's
of his
fabricated
star,
ones,
there's
yeah.
fabricated ones. One of the most famous fabrications is an article that came out in Sepia magazine in about 56, 57.
Okay.
That specifically, the article is called "What Do African Americans?" It doesn't say African Americans, but what do African Americans?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
What do African Americans think of Elvis?
Yeah.
And one of the stories that comes up in there is a story about Elvis in Boston. It's either he's in Boston or he's at what is on Murrow's television show, Person to Person.
Yeah.
And he says that the only good thing African Americans
I've heard this, yeah.
for is was it buying my records and shining my shoes.
Yeah.
And that is that's a big deal.
That's
right.
a big allegation. Yeah.
Especially because the audience for rock and roll is mixed.
Yeah.
Right. It's not a white audience. It is a white and black
Thanks
audience.
to Elvis. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. Exactly. So one of the reporters from another magazine, Jet, decides to go out and basically try to confirm it.
Yeah.
And there are a few issues with the statement. First, Elvis had never been to Boston. He'd never performed there up until that time.
Yeah.
He had never been on Murrow's television program.
Yeah.
In fact, he was offered the slot, and then his manager at the time, Colonel Tom Parker,
Yeah.
was like, "Yeah, you can interview Elvis only if you give us $250,000." And of course, Murrow said, "No." But what's interesting is despite them proving because it's not only, this can't be true because of this, but of course they're also interviewing people who are near him, people who grew up around him in Tolpo, and just saying like Elvis is someone who cares very deeply about this culture. This isn't like you have guys on here like Pat Boone.
Yeah.
Pat Boone is definitely someone who is a bit more of like a vulture to this. He's definitely a guy, he's taking these blues standards, he's watering them down, he's changing them around for no reason other than to like make it more palatable.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not what Elvis does. A lot of Elvis' stuff is, it's sped up, of course. There's some changes to the arrangement.
If anything, Elvis brought what he knew that white people would not accept, and he brought it to face. He brought it to mainstream, and that's why we're at where we are in music, because Elvis made pelvic thrusting something that you can do on national television. And on that note of like a real magazine interview that Elvis had where he's talking about the people that influenced him, I have a direct quote. "The color folks been singing and playing it just like I'm doing. I got it from them. People seem to think I started this business, but rock and roll was here a long time before I came along. Nobody can sing that kind of music like colored people. I can't sing like Fats Domino." And so it like completely contradicts that whole interview of him being like, no, like they can't do anything except shine my shoes and buy my music. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a rumor like that is, well, it's not even a rumor, it's a fabrication.
Yeah.
But it's interesting just like how pervasive that is.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of feeds into like a very interesting issue around rock and roll, which is that, the reason Elvis broke through and none of these people did, or at least nobody did until after Elvis, is because Elvis was white.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I personally, it's the only person who knows the color of a man's soul is God, of course. But like, Elvis, from everything I can see, he's not racist.
No.
But his success definitely came out of a racist system.
Of course.
That did offer him a number of undue benefits that was just not available to any of his contemporaries at the time.
So Sam Phillips, you had brought him up. He had said this prior to meeting Elvis Presley. And I changed a little bit because there's some wording that I don't want to say. But basically he says, "If I could find a white man who had the black sound and the black feel, I can make $1 billion." This was before meeting Elvis. So literally it goes to show that like POC have they've been the target of like their culture and everything, but it was just unacceptable for them to be in the limelight.
Right.
And Elvis came along and was like, "Hey, I'm here and I'm really good at this and I really like this kind of music." And Sam Phillips was like, "Thank God." Because now you're on the radio and now we see a blend of these cultures coming together.
And what's interesting is you also see it the other way around too.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not as prevalent just because of how the dynamics work in all of this. But like, for example, Chuck Berry's first hit was Maybelline.
Yeah.
And at the time, he was signed to Chess Records, which was in Chicago at the time, I believe. And Leonard Chess, the guy who ran Chess Record, said that basically he was looking for a hillbilly song sung by a black man.
Yeah.
Which is what Maybelline was.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. It's going both ways. Like I said, the dynamics are different, but it very much is the genre is a lot more mixed than I think a lot of people recognize or agree to. And I think especially now, that's the difficulty with like reevaluating all of this now.
Yeah.
Is that it's very difficult to understand a time that we weren't in, right? It's very difficult to understand how these things operate, right? And because of that, it leads to a lot of nuances that some people just don't get, or some people might just not be too interested in digging into.
Yeah. Or some people are just scared to revisit it at all because they're scared of finding something that they're not ready to find, right?
Yeah,
because it would damage their view and what they've been taught about Elvis, right? But I still think it's really important to talk about. And I feel like by talking about, we're not taking away his title, rather we're just bringing to light these really great individuals who are often forgotten in rock and roll history.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's important to, like I said, realize how big this is. It isn't just Elvis.
No, it's much bigger than him.
And it's important to recognize all of that. But I think with that, that's a good conversation here and a good place to stop.
Yes.
So we're going to take another break, and when we get back, we're going to talk a bit about some rock instrumentation and kind of the technology behind the sound. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll see you guys back in a few minutes.
See ya.
we go live in 5, 4.
Ready, camera 2. And wipe it.
Welcome to KBVR TV. Come join our team.
And welcome back. So, we had our little debate segment. We were talking about the timeline of rock and roll, but now we want to spend some time talking about technology. So, of course, music is a social technology all on its own, right? The development of certain sounds, certain patterns, certain rhythms, that's all great. But, you know, to play rock, you need to play an instrument. And what better instrument is there to play rock with than a guitar? So we want to real quick talk about kind of the history and development of guitars between really the 1920s and the 1950s. So what we have here are two examples of kind of the starter guitars going into the 1930s. So over here, we have our usual standard acoustic guitar, right? A few issues here. It's a good instrument, right? But it has resonance problems. So remember, you're performing in like music halls, you're performing in places where a lot of people are dancing, a lot of people are moving, you're in a big band setting. This doesn't produce enough resonance to really sound right in a hall, right? And over here, we have a resonance guitar. Now, a resonance guitar is cool because it's full of metal. Instead of resonating in the body, like this guy over here, this uses this little metal cone right here. This is the resonator, so this is where all the noise comes from. And it makes a really cool sound that's like really unique to bluegrass, and it can come through in a hall, but people want to do more, and also it's kind of getting expensive to use large groups like that. So what we need is we need some form of electrification to make the sound come out more. And that's really what the development of guitars between the 30s and the 50s is really focused on, how to amplify and electrify the sound to bring it out in that setting. So as we move to the next slide here, we'll see an example of this. So this is the first electrified guitar. This is the A22 frying pan. This was invented by what would later become the Rickenbacker Corporation. And it's super cool. It's fully electric, right? It's amplified. This thing down here, this is all a big metal amplifier. It's super cool, but it's heavy, like ridiculously heavy. This thing is all aluminum, right? It's supposed to be played as a lap steel because it's just that heavy. It cannot be handheld. So what we need is something new in the process of inventing guitars to bring it ridiculously expensive too. So that leads us to this. So this is the Gibson L5. The Gibson L5 was invented in 1936, 37, somewhere around there. And what makes this unique is the pickup. So the pickup here, this is a Charlie Christian pickup. It's a simple bar with a wire coiled around it, with metal posts inside the coil. And the idea is that basically as you're playing the metal strings, it's amplified in the pickup. Or, sorry, I should say the vibration of the strings is picked up in the pickup, and then that sound is run through an amplifier to actually produce the full sound. And these things are really cool. This is like the first mass-produced like pickup guitar. These things maybe weigh like 10, 12 pounds, so they aren't really that heavy. And they're really effective at what they do. But of course, this needs to get developed more because, you know, people want more out of this technology. They want a sound that's more stable, more even. They want something that doesn't have as much noise in the line, which leads to basically an arms race in pickup development. So over here, this is the standard bar coil. This is what you would see in an L5. This over here is a P90. P90s are usually seen in the ES150, which is also by Gibson. And the difference is basically how these are coiled. So this is a single set coil like this. This is also a single set coil, but the configuration inside is a bit different. It's a bit technical to go through, but the difference is enough that this ES150, which is called an ES150, it's an electric Spanish 150. The cost is around $150 for the time. these are extremely popular, right? So this is kind of what takes us into the 1950s. In the 1950s, we get something much cooler. So Gibson basically comes to this guy named Les Paul, who's a guitar maker, and is like, hey, do you want to make a guitar? And Les Paul's like, absolutely, I want to make a guitar. And he makes this. This is the first Gibson Les Paul guitar. And what makes it special is, first and foremost, Les Paul's a very famous designer. He takes into a ton of considerations. The second thing is the pickup style. This is a humbucking pickup style. So instead of a single coil, it's 2 coils. They're next to each other. The idea being that if you put them next to each other, you can cancel out the sounds from one. So if a sound is in one coil, it cancels out in the other. So you have less sound, which means that these are a lot more effective in much more crowded spaces, places like large concert venues where you just don't have the space for it. And with that, I mean, this is what leads us into modern guitar development. This is the stuff that everyone uses, the stuff that everyone plays, and takes us into rock from there. Yeah, that's a guitar. That's what it is.
One thing I really love about my job is I get to work with a lot of different people and have a lot of fun with them.
Oh man, the bullpen, it's honestly my second home. It's always like something's going on here, it's always music playing, but at the same time, it's like that one big family feel here. So yeah, that's what the bullpen means to me.
It's a place where we like to foster a lot of our community, where you get to know people really well, a place to hang out.
What I like about OMED in general is it's just like the community aspect.
It's just such a fun place to work. I always like to say it's the best job on campus.
It's like the one place like where like you could be like radio, work for a magazine publication, you can do everything and like it's kind of accepted and normalized. So yeah.
It's just so much fun. I can't stress that enough.
Why not work here? It's a really cool place to be.
And welcome back. Well, this has been a pretty cool episode, talking about the birth of rock and roll and kind of all the things that feed into it, how much stuff's kind of going on in, the birth of the genre. As a genre show, we don't often get a chance to really go back and talk about like how these things kind of feed into what we think of as a genre and kind of how amorphous the idea of a genre is. Because, when you're talking about something like rock, the influences, there's so many things that are feeding into it. And you can't really tell kind of what's important, what's not. Everything kind of flows together in a way that's very difficult to describe. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it's very, very interesting to be able to take a look at a genre from this perspective rather than like how we normally do it. This is a really great episode. I mean, what do you think?
I'm just glad we got to talk about New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And I was able to share information that I had actually received from a ghost tour when I was there about how rock and roll came to be, because the guy was just elaborate. So I was glad I could just share that information and, end it with some Led Zeppelin, because why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we should take over the Discovery Channel, though. I think this is proving to be very fruitful for us. So.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. But if they want to give us a call, they're going to have to wait a little bit.
Yeah.
So we'll see y'all around next time, and y'all have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Enjoy the weather. Jazz isn't real. Jazz is very real, Emergen. Yeah, I was born in Hello? We don't have a news channel or broadcast or... Who are you?
Breaking news! Elvis is visiting people in their near-death experiences and he's bringing them back to life. We can't explain it yet, but we're gonna figure it out. Here. See y'all next evening. We'll have a reason. Good night and God bless, and stay in your homes and don't die. Thank you.
We have to contact Elvis.
I mean, if we're gonna do a special about it, we gotta do research, so.
This is the only way.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
No, but I can
Music to our ears. It's important.
It's important,
Okay.
It's important.
Ready? Okay. Okay.
E-L.
You're not moving your hand, right?
No.
Okay, I'm not moving my hand either.
V-2. Dude.
Oh God.
I.
Oh God. No, there's no way. There's no way. No, we have to say goodbye. We have to say goodbye. There's no. I don't want to talk.
Please, Elvis, say goodbye.
It's not.
Hey, how you doing?
Oh my God, Kaylene.